More short views later. But next, the UK is the first to approve the Pfizer COVID vaccine and could start rolling it out next week. To Australia's eventual rollout, Scott Morrison has said safety first. The plan is to see how the Brits do and, if all is well, dole out the first doses in Australia from March 2021. I'm pleased with this. Australia's COVID situation is infinitely less severe than the UK's. We can afford to wait a couple of months. But a couple of months is not long enough to ascertain long-term side effects. Now, for the record, I am not an anti-vaxxer. I love vaccines. But this is a new vaccine for a novel virus. There will be many Australians who are hesitant to be at the front of the vaccination queue, and look, fair enough, particularly as community transmission in Australia is all but eradicated at this point. How fortunate, then, that the government is not mandating the vaccine. But that doesn't mean they don't want to. Scott Morrison betrayed himself in August as he walked back comments on the vaccine after saying this in a radio interview.
I would expect it to be as mandatory as you can possibly make it. There are always exemptions for any vaccine on medical grounds, but that should be the only basis.
But governments don't have to mandate a COVID vaccine in order to make it, well, mandatory. Big corporations will do it for them. Qantas CEO Alan Joyce stated that passengers will have to provide proof of vaccination to board Qantas flights and believes other airlines will do the same. Ticketmaster is considering connecting patrons' vaccination and testing status to their digital tickets. Allow me now to make a dark prediction. What if rideshare and taxi companies demand the same? And big restaurant chains and cinema franchises like Hoyts, perhaps shopping centres like Westfield and supermarkets like Coles and Woolworths. If I'm correct, then little by little, big corporations will cause enough inconvenience to force most people to get that COVID vaccine, even if they don't want to. And the government will not have needed to lift a finger. Thanks to the internet, corporations have grown their monopolies to the point where they have arguably more power over people's choices than governments do. And for that, governments will be thanking their lucky stars. Now, Sam, like I mentioned, that's a pretty dark prediction, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. I mean, what's your take?
Well, look, I guess there's two different ideas going on here. I mean, the first is that corporations have a lot of power over all of us. I don't think there's going to be much argument here. I mean, if Google wanted to turn off their search function in Australia, I don't know how to use the internet. I don't know how to code. Or what are you going to use? Bing? Is that still a thing on Microsoft? Like, you know, so take that as a given. But to the substantive point here, that you know, individual companies can use their market power to enforce vaccines. I'm okay with that. You know, I'm okay with that. We have a no jab, no play for a lot of preschools in Australia. I'm okay with that. You know, I'm conscious of what the science is, and I take your point that, you know, a 7,000 person clinical trial is so good, a 50 or 60,000 trial would be better. I take your point that there might be some complications in there, though statistically you're down to the, you know, standard deviation, 6 sigma or something that you're in that general range. I'm confident of the science, and I'm okay to say, no, get the jab. You know, what the hell? I mean, if you've got individual religious objections, fine. I don't think the state or some company should be trampling on your beliefs there. But if you're just some Byron Bay, NIMBY, hippie, you know, la-di-da, crystal's going to heal me, well, okay, don't get on the flight. Or go find a flight that will take you. But I'm not comfortable with the government telling Qantas, you've got to tell people who can and can't get on your flight. No, that's Qantas's business. Fly Virgin. Fly another airline. Take your money elsewhere.
I never knew you were such a free marketeer, Sam. That's a very, very interesting perspective from you. Now, look, Caleb, speaking of the free market, look, is there an argument here to be made that perhaps a niche will open up if enough companies, like, enough airlines, as Alan Joyce said, he thinks a lot of them will do it, enough companies do this, will there be enough room for people who don't want to get vaccinated to go elsewhere? Could this be good for the market generally in terms of competition?
Well, that's market forces, isn't it? I have the same with Sam here. I mean, if a business wants to tell you what you can or cannot do when you're on their property, that should be their business. I mean, in my utopia, if a cafe said to me, I don't like the look of your beard, you can't come in here, they should be able to do that. Why not? It's their business, it's their property, they're the ones running the joint.
It's a very good-looking beard, though, Caleb. It's a very good-looking beard, mate. It's very full and very lush.
It is quite lush. It needs a bit of a trim, I think. But if a business puts down the rules of engagement, you have to follow them if you want to engage with that business. No one forces you to fly with Qantas or to fly with Virgin or Tiger or whoever else. And if it turns out, and I'll say right here that I think Qantas or any other outfit saying that you can't fly with them unless you have a vaccine is potentially very unworkable. I mean, how do you actually institute that? But if that means that someone sets up an outfit that says, well, you can fly with us without a vaccination, then great. That's the free market. Let businesses do what they want to do. I'm not concerned about businesses setting the rules of engagement if you want to engage with them. That's just part of business. It's part of the free market.
Well, look, surely, Michael, though, there's possibly a privacy issue here. I mean, Ticketmaster talking about connecting people's vaccination status and COVID testing status to their digital tickets. If you look at their little information section where they talk about this data being stored with a third party. I mean, what third party that could be, they don't actually mention. I mean, surely with so little privacy nowadays, I mean, your health data is the most private data you have. Do we really want companies, even if it's only a couple, to be recording this kind of stuff? What are they going to do with it?
Well, Daisy, I think that's a very good point. I'm not sure I want to live in Caleb's utopia somehow, but look, they might be turning people away with beards, Caleb, but when they start turning Conservatives from Adelaide away, you might go hungry. But look, the point, I suppose, is this, that what you raised, Daisy, is, I think, very valid. And the other panellists have spoken about the free market. Well, we've seen in a number of circumstances that when one company takes the lead, the rest of the people in that particular area follow. And there's no competition at all. Qantas one day, it'll be Virgin and Rex. Rex, I think, is doing the Sydney to Melbourne route. So they'll be next. Everyone will do it. And look, I mean, there's a number of factors here also that I think are of concern. One, we're not going to get the vaccine anytime soon. When we do, it'll be rolled out slowly. So what happens if you need to get to visit Granny in Melbourne and you're not one of the first 6 million that are going to be in the queue? I'm
pretty sure Qantas has said this is only for their international flights to start with.
OK, well, what not? But, I mean, it could be the same Granny could be in London, for goodness sake. I mean, there's going to be impediments here. There'll be court challenges, I suppose. And then, of course, how do they prove you've had it? I mean, this is the other thing. I mean, you can go on a flight and you've got to self-declare I'm healthy, but there's no doctor at the airport to test whether you've got the flu or not, or any other vaccination as it is. I mean, I've been over the world many times, had all sorts of jabs like a pincushion, but, they can't prove it. No one's looking up your medical record to the best of my knowledge, so how are they going to prove you've had this jab? So, I mean, there's a number of factors here, I think, logistically, which are of concern. I'm happy to have the jab. I don't want to be the front of the queue, but I'm happy to be second and see what happens to the first bloke.
Well, look, I mean, the point you make there about sort of just how if one company goes, the others will follow is sort of the point that I'm making. When we talk about corporations nowadays, they are so massive. Yes, you can talk about going elsewhere, but there's actually not that much choice nowadays, and it's very, very hard to come through. I mean, if we take a sidestep, say big tech, they just gobble up smaller companies. They buy them out. That's why Facebook bought Instagram, for goodness sake. They're so large. It's very, very hard to make headway against them. And speaking of vaccines, a few years ago when swine flu was a problem, they actually rolled out a sort of a mini rollout of a vaccine in the UK for it, and they forced healthcare workers to take it. And in a couple of thousand of them across Europe and the UK, they developed narcolepsy, and they also developed a terrible muscle deterioration condition that meant they could collapse at any moment. And this was from a sort of emergency rollout of a vaccine. And look, in other situations, say I have epilepsy, for instance, and in rare side effects of other vaccines, they can cause encephalitis, which is a brain inflammation. If say, I had the COVID jab, or someone like me, about 1 in 50 people are epileptic, and this new vaccine caused an allergic reaction or anything like that, well, I'd really rather not have corporations mandating that. But, Caleb,
Daisy,
what do you think about those potential risk factors?
But big businesses are only big businesses because we've made them so, aren't they? I mean, they become big because we continue to use their products. We, as free agents in the market, have the choice whether we want to engage with a big business and use their product, or do we want to use a product from a smaller business? Why do we continually use the products that are given to us by big business and then later complain when big business changes the rules of engagement? They only have that power because we've allowed them to have that power. We, as consumers, keep giving them money, and so, of course, they're going to have control. But we did that as consumers.
Well, in most circumstances, Caleb, but of course, a bunch of today's big businesses were yesterday's government monopolies. I mean, take Telstra, for example. Now, we didn't have any choice about whose telegraph line or telephone line we used until about 1990.
Now, look,
it was the government's.
It's a fair point, but going back to Daisy's point about she might not be, this might not be a vaccine that's suitable for her. But Daisy, wouldn't you therefore want governments, corporations, you name it, putting as many barriers or facilitating as many people, I should say, towards getting this virus as possible, towards getting this vaccine as possible, so that you don't have to? I mean, if you have side effect profile that means that this isn't suitable for you, don't you want the community to have enough herd immunity around it so that you don't have to be worried that the bloke coughing on you at the bar next to you is going to give you COVID?
Well, maybe if COVID was sort of a flesh-eating virus that killed sort of, 40 or 50 people that got it. But the bottom line is, we know this now. According to the CDC, COVID has a less than 1% fatality rate. And according to the World Health Organization, most cases, 80% of cases, are going to be either asymptomatic to mild. I mean, we know, and we can admit now, that the risk of COVID was sort of grossly overstated at the start. And look, why wouldn't it be? It was a new virus. No one knew it was going on. Governments were worried and frightened. We also know that COVID primarily kills people, elderly people, people with comorbidities. Again, the CDC in the USA found that it was something like 94% of people who died of COVID technically died with COVID. They had these comorbidities. So, yeah, sure, if COVID was a terribly serious virus that kills everyone it touches,
it's a pretty serious virus. I'm sorry. It's a pretty serious virus.
Well, it can be serious, 20% of the time, but most of the time it simply won't be. I know a number of people who've had it. They're sort of, my age, very, very fit and healthy. They had it for 5 minutes. They had a bad cold for a week, and now they're perfectly fine. Now, while COVID is bad, it is very, very bad. But the reality is most of the time it's not. And whether it's government mandates or corporate power, I don't think people should be pressured to have a vaccine.
And the 250,000 Americans who have died from this thing, I mean, what, they're just sooks? I mean, what...
No.
It's a serious...
When did I say that?
It's a serious virus. I mean, the numbers are the numbers. I don't know. I don't know where you...
Sam, you're missing. We're going to have to wrap to a break, but you missed my point. 94% of them died with COVID. They had comorbidities. We know who we need to protect with a vaccine, but as for the general population who might not want to opt in, I'm sorry, I don't think it's appropriate.